Hello and welcome back to Fly to Freedom. Today's episode is for anyone who feels like the recovery advice sounds beautiful in theory, but kind of doesn't really work for them and their body because sometimes the body doesn't feel neutral. Sometimes there's chronic pain, sometimes there's diabetes, blood sugar instability. Sometimes there's a myriad of food intolerances, gut issues, hormonal shifts, migraines, autoimmune systems. And sometimes your body genuinely reacts. And when that's the case, phrases like just listen to your body, trust your body, let go of control can feel not just confusing, but actually unsafe. I'm joined today by Rachael Stern. Rachael is a clinician in a private practice, and she also brings her own lived experience of an eating disorder. She works in the spaces where eating disorders overlap with chronic illness, chronic pain, neurodivergence, and medical complexity. What I really appreciate about Rachael is that she doesn't speak about recovery in tidy narratives. She speaks about it in the grey areas, in real bodies, in complicated lives. Rachael, I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Before we dive into really talking about the themes, would you be willing to share a little bit about yourself and your own experience with an eating disorder so people can understand where you're speaking from?
Sure. About myself broadly, I am a mother of three and a stepchild. So I have four. So I think a lot about these issues in parenting these days. I live in the Washington, D.C. metro area, though I have lived quite all over the place. And besides being a clinician in private practice, I have also had a prior career in nonprofits and politics, and I am the president of the board of PDA North America. So I keep myself pretty involved in the world and what's going on. In terms of my life growing up and with an eating disorder, that's long, but I'll hit the high notes, low notes,
Okay,
as it may be.
whatever feels good for you.
Yeah. So I was one of those kids born into the era where everyone was afraid of their kid being just a little bit overweight. And when I had a mother who, very well intended, did not really trust her own instincts, I think around food or a lot of other things. And so she listened to a lot of doctors, even when their advice was objectively terrible. I was put on my first diet. I'm going to diet in quotations when I was 6 months old. Uh,
Wow, 6 months old.
so my parents were told to start watering down formula, and that's what they did. So when I think of the history of my eating disorder, I didn't have a time before. I feel like I have a time after, which is wonderful. But I think my hunger cues and my sense of my body were messed with, maybe not intentionally, from very young.
You were
I
quite literally taught not to listen to your body.
absolutely. um, in a lot of different ways. Food was one of the ways. But I remember, going to elementary school and being told that, the reason I was being teased was because of my weight. And I look back at pictures and there's like no way that's true. And I had a great group of friends, which I think kept me very safe and somewhat insulated. But growing up in Los Angeles in a very weight focused culture around parents who I think well intentioned wanted me to fit in so I would feel good, spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of mental and emotional stress on managing what they saw was a weight problem for me. And my internalization of that was, I don't think I ever learned to listen to my body because every time I would say, I'm hungry, for example, was just true, I would be told that there was a different medical reason for that other than, just being hungry. My eating disorder, I suppose, as my own, started when I was in middle school. I watched an Oprah episode on eating disorders, and I, like so many of us, heard all of the behaviors and none of the dangers. My
Yes.
my brain just sort of filtered them out, And that's when I started acting on some of those. But I think I had a pretty intensive setup. I was like, if I can do something not normal to make things feel normal, that sounds ideal. Or maybe I can find a way to control weight that I had the sense from the outside world was really unruly and therefore a problem. And that's when a lot of my behavior started. Skip ahead, many years of behaviors all over the map. When I was in my very late teens was when the first weight loss surgery pushes were happening. And I was unfortunately caught up in that sweep with my parents, had a weight loss surgery, and I woke up from that surgery like someone had handed me the keys to an eating disorder that I had been looking for my whole life. And I say that, I think, looking for my whole life because I was told it would be better. And, I kept hearing over and over, losing weight won't solve all your problems. Losing weight won't solve all your problems. Because objectively, like, that's true. But I think what that didn't honor was the privilege that we understand as going with a quote unquote, or I'm not going to say typical, a body that fits in. A
Yeah.
body no one's looking at and thinking anything specific. Maybe even a body that people are looking at and admiring because of the social standards we've created. And so, with all the power I suddenly had and all of the changes in how I was being treated as I was utilizing that power, I got very sick. And I remember, all my life, all anyone had wanted for me was to lose weight. And suddenly I was losing too much and they wanted me to stop. And I had this, I don't know if we're allowed to curse on here, but this very,
Absolutely, go for it.
I was being told it was too much, it was too fast. And I was, fuck you all. Like, I'm just doing what everyone told me to do. Um, and I knew it wasn't right. I knew what was going on in my head was, I didn't need to be thinking about it all the time. And I knew it was obsessive. And I knew I wasn't doing other things. But as it escalated and escalated, I didn't know what to do anymore. And I found it, once I started looking for help, once I said, all right, this is, we're getting into a dangerous place. I don't know what to do because I have these two clashing worlds of messages. Um, I'd started seeking out recovery oriented things, but I was also, had a lifetime and still doctors telling me, keep going, and this is, and side note, this is what we do to people who are not in a body that we have decided looks anorexic, right?
Yeah.
We prescribe them eating disorders.
Yes.
And then somehow we cross that line and now it's a problem. So I was living that dichotomy very much central to my experience. So I was seeking out help and I was having a really big problem getting help because no one knew what to do with someone who had been through what I had been through. Um, and I found a great therapist. She was awesome, but it wasn't going to be enough. I joined a wonderful group with some people I still keep in touch with many years later. Um, but I needed much higher level of care. I was having a big problem finding a residential place to take me. One, because I couldn't just eat like everyone else, whatever that meant. And two, because they saw the medical issues and they kind of went, we're not going to deal with that. So I ended up somewhere that had decided they could make it work. And I'm not going to name that place because I think those places have changed so much in the many decades since. But I ended up somewhere that was willing to try.
Hmm.
And I think that's the first time I started to see some of the chronic illness interact. I did not have diagnoses for all my chronic illnesses then, but I did know I was allergic or like reacted to some weird stuff. So I went into a treatment facility where you're allowed, three exceptions to foods that you won't eat. But because the one thing I knew I had was mast cell activation syndrome. And when you have that, you react to things that you don't test allergic to, right? I mean,
Okay.
you can test me all day for an avocado allergy and it won't come up positive. But when I eat avocados, I go into anaphylaxis, even if it like touches something. So I was basically not allowed to not like anything because I had to include my allergies as my dislikes and spend a lot of time pushing back on, like, it's not that I'm afraid of avocado, it's that I literally don't want to die. But like,
Yeah.
I'll eat butter, like just replace it with something, you know? This is not an eating disorder problem. This is the like I can't eat that problem. And I went in and I sort of had this mentality, and this is, very black and white thinking, that I was going to do it once and I was going to do it right.
It's very eating disordered thinking, isn't it?
Isn't it? It's also very neurodivergent in hindsight.
Oh, okay.
And I kind of did, but I found myself, once I got to the point where I could sort of sustain healthy enough eating for myself, in the situation, putting myself in the situation of being a role model for other people. And by giving myself that role, I kind of had a standard I had to hold myself to.
Mm.
And that does not mean I didn't struggle. I was in treatment for a very long time. I did have some relapses along the way, pretty early, like, a couple years after treatment. But I absolutely would say today, and for, I don't know when I date it to, but certainly more than a decade, I am a fully recovered person who knows a lot more about myself. So, in hindsight, for me, my eating disorder was a lot of things, but I'd say the primary thing, it was trauma directly related to food and body. My story since then involves sort of the triad of mast cell activation syndrome, POTS, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Um, those interacted pretty strongly with my sense of my body, because growing up, any pain with exercise, I was told, was because I was fat, because I was lazy, because I was, all these stereotypes. And I was none of the above. I mean, at times I absolutely was living in a fat body, but I was not like lazy, had nothing to do with it. I was experiencing pain other people were not experiencing.
Hmm.
And so that diagnosis was pretty big for me in sort of reviewing my life and understanding where it interacted with everything. The place neurodivergence comes in, my story is very similar to a lot of people's. I had a child who was neurodivergent, and I started, once we figured out what was going on with her, started seeing myself in everything I was saying about her, even though we're actually very different people. Um, but I would end up in her psychiatry appointments with her psychiatrist laughing at me. And I was like, okay, I get it. So I did go through the formal diagnosis process. Not everyone does, and self diagnosis is extremely valid. But for me, I felt like I needed it. And so I now know myself to be an autistic ADHDer. And I look back and I can tell you, I think it was missed for a lot of reasons. One is just age. We were not diagnosing high masking girls at that point. But I also think that I wasn't diagnosed because I was a fat kid, and everything attributed to why I didn't fit in, and everything attributed to any social struggles or any bullying or not getting, I grew up in theater, not getting parts in shows, was always told to me that it was because I was fat. And in hindsight, I think a lot of it was really neurodivergence. And so I think I'll be unpacking some of that for the rest of my life. But these things all really go together for me. And I know they do for a lot of people in different ways. So that's the shortest, longest version of.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like so many things were invalidated for you as you were growing up, and everything was blamed on your body size.
Yeah. And that's a really common experience, right? Uh,
Yes, yes, it is.
I mean, if you go into the doctor with unstable joints and you're heavy, it's because you're heavy. If you go into the doctor with unstable joints and you're, a person, the body they expect to see or falls into the way a chart works, they suddenly start looking into it.
Yeah.
It's a wildly different world.
And it's not right. Sorry, it's not right and it's not fair. And
Well, and the research doesn't support it.
no,
I
it
mean, I
doesn't.
think that's what's so upsetting to me about so much of the medical profession is we think of it as deeply research based and facts and evidence and deep knowledge of how body systems work. And at the end of the day, people are reading summaries through their own bias and they're applying those to humans. And that's not working. So I do think, I don't know if here is where I call for a complete revamp of modern medicine, but I do think it is I think it's necessary if we're serving actual people.
I would agree because it's totally off the subject. We're sort of off the subject, but still on the subject. The noise out there now is deafening. It's horrendous. People, you said you were prescribed an eating disorder.
Oh yeah.
I believe people are being done to so many people with all the weight loss drugs and stuff now. It's quite frankly terrifying.
Hmm.
And it's literally saying that listening to your own body is wrong. Hunger is wrong.
Right. It's like, here's a medication to make it shut up.
Yeah, it's insane. It's
It's not.
terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we think of like, gosh, the history of what, and this happens to men too, right? But the history of what we've done to women and how we've quieted women. And I just see this as one more way. It's like, let's, now it's not just getting people to shut up in society, but like maybe we can just actually have your brain stop talking
Yes,
about
which
what
is,
you want, which is horrifying.
and everybody gets more and more compliant as well.
Yeah. And I am nothing if not uncompliant.
Good for
So,
you.
and I hope I actually just bought a shirt that says feral because it's like I've needed that my whole life. But I think eating disorder treatment is a very compliant based system too. And that doesn't work for everybody. But I do think a little more non compliance is useful. I think great things have happened in the world because of it. It's not convenient for systems that exist, but some of those systems need to be challenged.
I agree. I agree so much because the current systems for eating disorder treatment are based on compliance, and they do seem to be more of a one size fits all than
Oh, yeah.
individuals. And people are very different. Sorry, I've gone really croaky.
Oh, yeah.
No idea why. But yes, people are very different and their bodies speak differently.
Hmm.
And like you said, with you were allowed three things that you weren't able to eat. Now, quite honestly, I'd be screwed.
Yeah.
I
Right.
would be absolutely screwed because there are so many things that I don't eat, not
Mhm.
from fear, but from the fact that they make me very sick.
Sure. Yeah, and truthfully, like there are a lot more than 3 things that I can't eat, and can't means I have, a reaction that is dangerous to my body or significantly painful. And I would say I'm one of the luckier folks with mast cell. Mine's very well controlled. But I have clients who, they kind of have one meal and they rearrange it in different ways, and that's what eating looks like for them, and that's how they stay safe physically. And that's an emotional struggle too. Like you mentioned at the beginning, recovering into a life where you're not necessarily going to enjoy tons of wonderful food and having that on the other side is not it's not that exciting for a lot of people.
Yeah.
uh, and I've had to deal with that with a lot of people. Some of those people over time are able to eat broader diets, but it's a lot of work, a lot of doctors listening, a lot of things doctors don't know much about, a lot of your own medical advocacy. And even then, that assumes there's, a medication or 5 that are going to work to help.
And I imagine a lot of nervous system regulation as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things we often miss in folks with some of these disorders is that they're eating and then they're having a panic attack. This has happened to multiple of my clients. It's a thing I see often. And I hear panic attack, and then I think all of our training, right? We hear eating, panic attack, we think eating disorder. Um, but what's happening for them is they're having an anaphylactic reaction. Part of that is panic. It should be. Your body thinks it's going to die.
Yes.
That's a point where you should panic. And they're just being flooded by hormones. And so they're scared to eat. not so much in necessarily a typical eating disorder way at the beginning, but in a like, this thing happens to me every time I do, and it's awful. I don't want to do that. Being able to pull apart, when people see me, like, where did this start, right? Did this start as an eating disorder the way we all think of eating disorders? Did this start as a bunch of disorders and disabilities that now we've created a whole system and fear and life around? Um, and I think that matters. I think that matters a lot. And I think it matters that we know that if we can going into recovery so we can figure out what that might look like. And at that point, I think for a lot of the kinds of folks I see, that's truly grief work.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. A lot of people listening will be navigating real medical conditions alongside recovery with
Right.
chronic pain, diabetes, these food intolerances, IBS, Crohn's, hormone issues.
Mhm.
How do you think recovery changes when these symptoms are actually happening?
I think it depends dramatically on what those issues are. Type 1 diabetes, for example, is an extremely high risk for eating disorders because you're having to count everything. You're having to act as your own organ. You're having to constantly think about what you're doing, calculating, making sure you're taking enough insulin, but not too much insulin. And if you're low, like what sugar is inside. It's a whole different world than this intuitive eating model. I think intuitive eating is fantastic. I think it's great if it works for you. It sounds wonderfully ideal. So many people can't eat that way, whether that's because they can't eat the foods that they are suddenly aware their body wants, or they can't eat at those times because of medication dosing, or they truly don't have the interoception or the sense of the inside of their body to know when they're hungry, when they're full, what it feels like to, some people just don't have that. Um,
Which isn't surprising when we're taught not to.
well, we're taught not to, and then also the overlap with neurodivergence and interoception can be a real struggle. So some people do have to pay attention to the clock, or maybe further into recovery or in recover, the way they eat just looks different, and that can be okay. I don't think we've come up with this sort of intuitive eating model, but also there's kind of one right way to be intuitive. And if you can't find that intuition, you're still sick. And I don't think that's true at all. I think it's much harder to recover when you can't do it intuitively past a point, but not impossible. I mean, people do it every day. I know. I'm honored to know so many people who live that every day. And that doesn't mean, I think, especially in those situations, that doesn't mean food is easy for you, right? You might be looking at a life where food's always hard.
Yes.
And maybe body stuff is always hard. Maybe, you're going to be significantly bloated for a decent chunk of your life. And that is uncomfortable, right? Like, that's not, we can say that's a weight thing. And I think for some people who don't experience chronic health stuff, it is. But for some people, it's like, no, it's like, well, my jeans fit in the morning and they literally don't fit by the end of the day. And then we start talking about, well, do we need to wear jeans? Like, what can we create either sensory wise or size wise that works for the life that you're going to live? But we can't always take away the physical impact. And yeah, like that just doesn't feel good, right? No one wants to feel that way.
So you're looking more to a way of recovery that is more focused on taking care of yourself and taking care of what feels right for you rather than the traditional recovery model.
Yeah. Oh, and I think, what does self-care and what does self-love look like versus what does using food or lack thereof or other eating disorder behaviors in ways that you're purposefully hurting yourself, controlling yourself, or you don't need to be. Like, how do we make that shift?
Yeah.
I think that's a big piece.
To be treating yourself from a place of love rather than the place of fear and punishment and pain.
Right. Right. And I think that's harder when the most of the options aren't available to you.
Yes.
Or maybe just your favorite thing is not available to you, or like you can't go out to that restaurant actually with your friends and eat safely. That's I think it's also hard to go through the treatment system where you're surrounded by people who will be able to, and you're hearing from therapists or counselors like that's the goal, right? It's a lovely goal if it's attainable for you. Um,
Absolutely. To be able to eat freely without having to think about food, have what you want when you want, it is a beautiful goal. I thought I was getting close to that goal. I thought I was able to have everything.
mhm,
And then my body says, actually, no, I
mhm,
don't want you to have dairy anymore.
mhm.
I'm going to start giving you lots of symptoms every time you have dairy that are so intolerable you just won't be able to have it.
Mm,
And then you've got to go through the whole like, so this feels restrictive again.
yeah.
And I mean, I'm still very privileged. I still can eat many, many foods.
Mhm.
Some people's field of what they're able to have is so narrow that they're never going to be able to eat freely. They're never going to be able to tick the boxes that recovery says they should be able to tick.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, again, right? That's grief work. That is looking at, facing, dealing with the emotions, the loss of what we think of as a basic, human need, a basic human right to be able to,
Grieving the life you should have had, the
eat food.
life you deserve.
Well, yeah, the life you saw on the other side.
Yeah.
And I don't know how significant your dairy stuff is, but it also has people reading labels all the time.
Yes.
Right?
Oh,
Like
I do have to do
we're
that. Yeah.
back, we're back in tons of labels if there's a specific, whether like celiac or dairy problems, or
Yes.
with some folks with type 1 looking for the carbohydrates.
Yeah. And it feels like you're back. I know that there's always been a few issues with dairy through my life,
Mhm,
but it's only actually in the last few months post recovery that
mhm,
my body is saying no, absolutely no, 100% no. Now, even the slightest bit, I'm going to give you a blinding migraine, terrible upset stomach,
yeah,
make you feel like you're 10 sizes larger and nothing will fit because your body is bloated so much.
mhm,
And yeah, so I'm back reading labels. It's amazing how much dairy hides in so many things. And I know I'm not doing this from a place of fear,
mhm,
but the behaviors are so similar to what I was doing deep in the anorexia that so much self care needs to happen.
yeah,
And lots of reassurance that this is not coming from a place of fear. This is coming lovingly from a place of self care.
right. Well, and you can't just get to a place where you can ignore all of that, right? That's sort of the promise I think that's held for so many folks.
Yes.
And it for others it's not real. And I think it's so much harder, right? Like here, read labels anyway, but don't care about the things you cared about before.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, just think about the same thing wildly differently. It's really difficult. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think it's incredible that you were able to figure that out and to do that work. It is so hard.
Honestly, I'm so grateful my body is so shouty.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, every time I wasn't figuring it out properly, my body told me more clearly. So, I'm grateful that I'm able to listen to my body now because I didn't know how for most of my life.
Yeah. Well, I see this thing too. At least at least I used to see a lot of it, that people were told to ignore the health issues for the sake of recovery, right? Well, yeah, you might have dairy problems, but you have to eat it anyway to recover. Um, and then you start to connect recovery to actually hurting yourself, to feeling awful. Um, and that doesn't sound good. And I think we're getting to a place where there's a lot less of that. There's more awareness, but I'm sure if you also try to find community around it, like dairy-free communities, you're going to find a lot of eating disorder sounding.
Yes, I expect
It's
so. I
also
haven't looked into that, but yeah.
right. It's also, but I think like so many of us are looking for like people like us, whatever that
Yeah.
means. And if the places those people exist are not accessible to you, it's really hard to find people who fit in or people who get it.
Sometimes the very nature of having an eating disorder, having a system that has been so deprived,
Mhm.
actually creates a lot of these intolerances anyway,
I've seen that.
which is, it's hard to know. It is incredibly hard to know, especially in early recovery, whether your body is reacting because it's relearning how to digest
Mhm.
or whether it's reacting against a particular food.
Sure. I would also add to that many of the people who are at high risk for eating disorders are at high risk for all of these other things as well.
This,
So
yeah.
while yes, having a body that's been deprived for a long time sometimes maybe creates some issues around certain types of digestion, sometimes it's also just the expression of something that was going to happen, whether the eating disorder was expressed or not. One of the things I keep going back to is the numbers we have. There's these sort of concentric circles of eating disorders and neurodivergence and this sort of triad of mast cell POTS, HEDS, plus like every autoimmune thing, right?
Mhm.
And the numbers we have are so bad. The numbers we have on neurodivergence and eating disorders are based on people who had access to care for their eating disorder. So they were, I believe, in residential treatment. And at least in the United States, our healthcare system is, I'm just going to say, wildly broken. And the research we have shows there's like about a 30% overlap of people with anorexia are on the autism spectrum. I think the way they did it was have, autistic traits. They didn't quite say these people are autistic. But one that assumed that's literally only people who had access to care, to higher levels of care, which
Mhm.
in the United States, like our healthcare system is, it's wildly broken. Um, and who has access to care is very much based on social class, really. When it costs, I don't even know anymore, but 20 something years ago, it was over $1,000 a day. And you're thinking like, a month to 3 months, absolutely minimum. So we're talking about a very privileged group of people, or they have good enough insurance, or someone has been able to help them fight insurance, which is not simple to do. And then you're taking people who have, either been assessed for autism, um, and shown up positive, which is hard to do as, for high masking women anyway. They get missed over and over and over again. And from that, we're coming up with like 20 to 30%. Like, I think the rates have got to be sky high.
Yeah.
And we're just missing so many things and so many people. And when you add, the other related things, like I just talked about, any autoimmunity, really, we're talking about the same people.
There's
Any of them
certainly
high risk for the other ones.
there certainly does seem to be a lot of traits that many people with eating disorders share.
Mhm.
I think the category of highly sensitive people definitely applies to
Mhm.
so many. And yeah, a lot of people have autistic traits, and
Well, and the thing that I think is a big struggle for, I don't want to say for those people, I am one of those people, for that community, right? It's like eating disorders work.
yes, they do.
We do things for a reason. They screen out sensory stuff. It's a special interest, it's a brain obsession. It quiets everything else around you. It makes you feel like you have something to lean on if you can't make the social connections that would feel really fulfilling to you. Um, and we're saying, let's just take that all away.
Yeah. And it
Um,
gets you, for a lot of people for a very long time, it gets you validation and some form of acceptance
mhm,
because of the way society celebrates certain body types.
right. It's a way to fit in until it's a way to stand out.
Yeah. It
Um,
also gives you structure.
yeah, ton of structure and numbers, and
Yeah.
it's sort of a perfect storm, right? And so when we think about asking someone to do less of that, to leave it behind completely, like, we have to replace it with things. We have to acknowledge the loss. Um,
There's so much grief involved in recovery.
yeah, there is, and we don't talk about the grief because we're afraid to. I think we're afraid to acknowledge that quote unquote negative behaviors do sometimes have positive impacts or useful impacts.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because eating disorders absolutely work because otherwise people wouldn't do it.
Yeah, why
They
would you?
work until they don't.
Yeah, and sometimes they work until they kill you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the scary part, is for so many people you don't know where that line is. I don't think any one of us knows where that line would be for our bodies until it happens.
Yeah.
I went through treatment in my very early 20s, and I can no longer count the amount of people I know that have died. And that's not normal. I'm pretty young. It's very much not normal. And I look at my clients and I see primarily adults, though I'll see a teen once in a while. I do actually really love teens. And they also know so many people who have died.
Yeah.
And we forget that's not typical at those ages, right? That's typical when you're 80, maybe, like, when you're an older person, but it's not when you're 18 or 21 or, even 40.
It's not. And so many people I know so many people that have died, particularly people they've been in treatment centres with.
Yeah.
This lack of awareness about the food intolerances, the chronic pain, the autoimmune diseases and stuff,
Mhm.
this really creates the storm that creates the trauma of recovery for people. Some people are so traumatized by their attempts at recovery, particularly in treatment centres.
Mhm. Yeah. You know, I think, and again, I'm speaking more to the States, but many, many years, probably a decade ago now, it's amazing how fast, a couple years becomes a decade.
Yes.
Uh, Venture capital firms bought almost all of our treatment centers. And they went from, passion projects that did make money, but required money to run. There were a couple, big chains that maybe were more than that, to money makers for investors. And I think the quality of care, it's like the quality of knowledge has gone up, but the quality of care has gone down. The quality of individuality has gone down at a time where we're more aware of the needs for it. There absolutely are some great treatment centers where this is not true. But if you're looking at what any given person's insurance might cover, that's usually what you see on it. And so I think there's also this huge link to, like, how our world functions, right? Like, the grief around that. Like, there's I'm not going to get into too much, but in the United States, there's a lot of grief right now around a lot of things for a lot of people. And that impacts people, right? Every time Congress votes to change healthcare, that affects these issues. That affects who has access to care. That affects, who feels worthy of care. We have a country here that's telling us all we're not worthy of care, and then asking people to say, find care, get care, stay in care, figure out a way because you're valuable. But we can't figure out a way to do that at this sort of, at least countrywide, and I would say it's larger than that, right? But at this larger social level, it's hard to feel worth it when insurance tells you you're just too expensive and not sick enough. And
And
that
one,
happens all the time,
and one of
daily.
the biggest symptoms of an eating disorder is that you don't feel sick enough and you don't feel like you deserve care.
No, I don't know anyone who's ever been sick enough.
I don't.
I I I I think you see sick enough when you're recovered.
Yes, because you start to question the thoughts of that you had, that like not being sick enough, and realize that very thought itself
Mhm.
is an indication of being sick enough.
Exactly.
The very thought that you don't deserve help is an
Mhm.
indication of how ill you are.
Well, and the group that is sometimes sick enough, according to the structures that uphold healthcare in the United States, are this, very specific group that, it's like people who are significantly underweight.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess the behaviors matter, right? But like we're really almost basing it on weight and how a body reacts to what you're doing. Um, if it's the system is so sick, and it
It
creates,
is here in the UK as well.
yeah, it creates that.
Yeah.
And people get, it's like people with bulimia here go into treatment and they haven't purged in 3 days or 5 days because someone is literally sitting on top of them after meals and they're not allowed to go to the bathroom alone. Like they're just, it's not possible. And insurance decides they're better because they're not purging. And it's like, well, but they're not gonna have someone sitting on them at home. Like, if we weren't doing this right now, this wouldn't be happening. So the benchmarks we use are to make money. They're not to help people. And the places that really do exist and are trying so hard to help people are enormously expensive. Not because they're just trying to make money, but because it's very expensive to have that level of care, to have that individuation that especially people with these disorders or disabilities need to have. I mean, also the rate of folks that are that disabled by them. I mean, there's a huge range. Some people live very typical lives where they work, kind of whatever job they intended, and they're they have enough energy to be fine raising children. And some people are deeply, deeply impacted and are not able to do those things, and they should have no less right to have access to care. And truthfully, these are all dynamic things. So some people are one on, 3 days of the week and the other on the rest of the days of the week.
Yeah. This system is certainly really unhelpful. I mean, here in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we have the NHS, so everybody has a right to care.
Mm-hmm.
However, the waiting lists are for eating disorders are like 2.5, 3 years long, unless you are such a low body weight that you're
Mm-hmm.
medically unstable, like severely medically unstable. But even then, because the system is over over demanded and underfunded, people that go into treatment are let out at a certain weight. The criteria is weight.
So it's all based on weight,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, it's so arbitrary, right? Different
It
people's bodies
is.
react to the same exact behaviors in completely different ways.
Yeah. And I really don't believe weight should have a place in treatment of an eating disorder, because you can have anorexia in any size body.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's been decided you have to call it atypical if you're above a certain BMI,
And
which
yet
I'm
it's
not.
right.
Seriously, for fuck's sake. But
It's and yet it's more typical. I mean, I guess I'm glad we have a category for people. We didn't used to, or not a good one. I use myself as an example of this all the time. Because I grew up fairly heavy and have been, much heavier at different points. I have very dense bones, which is great. It's great for me, right? Like it's wonderful to have dense bones, especially as I start to age and get into like perimenopausal time and all of that. But when I went into treatment for anorexia, my BMI, I think, was still in the obese category. And my body, like, if you look at the pictures, like, it doesn't make any sense.
mhm,
And I knew that then, right? But like, I would die overweight very easily from all the same things that someone dies from when they're underweight.
yeah,
Um, and that's truly because for my body, the way my body works, those things, I don't think BMI means much for anybody, right? We know that. But like, even if the number on the scale just has nothing to do with what's going on with my body, never has. And first of all, I think that's true for a lot of people. Like, bodies just do different things. They're grown differently. We come from different DNA and different parts of the world and planet. I think a lot of BMI is extremely racist, and I wish that I had as much expertise as someone better than me to have that conversation, but I think someone better than me should have that conversation. So much of the history of weight is just racist.
yeah.
And
BMI is, well, bullshit, misunderstood information. It bears no relevance to anything.
well, right. Like, and some of the sickest people are nowhere near too low on the BMI scale.
Yeah,
But you're right. Like you're talking about the UK, right? They're prioritizing, low unstable weights. It's
yeah,
like, well, we've clearly delineated, what sick enough means.
yeah,
In the meantime, we know people get sicker while they're waiting for treatment, right? Like once you're on a list and it's going to happen. So we're giving those people what, 3 years to get
yes.
that much sicker. I mean, I remember in my life, and I've seen this in my clients when they have to wait a couple months. I've seen the tailspin of what can happen. 3 years, like,
I know that if I'm very, very lucky in that
mhm,
I had access to funds that
mhm,
I was able to get private treatment. And when I had been recovered for, oh, a good year and a half, like fully recovered,
mhm,
my appointment came through for eating disorder treatment on the NHS. But where I was when I actually reached out, when I decided that now I'm going to do it,
mhm.
I didn't have more than a few months left
Yeah,
before I wasn't going to be here. I know that.
sure.
My body was failing, but my mind was failing so much more.
Mm,
So if I'd stayed on that waiting list, I wouldn't be here.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that makes me so, so sad because so many people don't have the privilege I had, the funds to be able to go privately. And that breaks my heart.
yeah. I mean, we have kind a different setup with the same problem, really.
Yeah.
And I would add, right, all of these other disorders, most doctors for them, not all, but most are not in network, meaning insurance. They won't take insurance even if you have great insurance. They're self pay and very expensive, right? We're not talking like self pay, but it's okay. We're talking about sometimes thousands of dollars for an appointment.
Wow.
Um, so again, who has access to care? Who has access to diagnosis? It's I don't think we will ever truly understand the numbers that we're talking about because they're not accessing a point where we could identify them. And truthfully, I think a lot of people have things blamed, if not on weight, on their eating disorder, right? I see a lot of people who end up with pretty severe POTS where it was blamed on the restriction. A lot gets blamed on restriction for people who've been underweight well into recovery, right? Oh, you're dizzy every time you go from sitting to standing because you had an eating disorder. It's like it doesn't really track anymore, does it? You know,
Yeah.
like it doesn't. That
People are
doesn't
still not being listened to.
right. But not being listened to, and doctors don't have the information. They just truly don't have the education on these issues. I worked on a bill in New York State a long time ago to mandate eating disorder training. It's like 2 hours of eating disorder training for doctors in medical school. And we could not pass it because it is nearly impossible to add anything to medical school curriculum the way it's based. Like we just couldn't do it. We know how little they're learning about eating disorders and how common they are. They're not learning about EDS or PODS or MCAS, unless it happens to be an interest of theirs, right? Like if maybe they have it or they know someone with it,
Yeah.
um, or they come across a patient and they happen to be open and interested. But we're the ones educating our doctors on our issues, and I think that's especially hard when you're going in with an eating disorder already and having to like explain why it's an eating disorder, explain why it matters if you're not underweight, explain, when you have a hard time figuring that out yourself.
Yes. And when your brain's not functioning properly because you're not nourishing yourself enough.
Right.
Do you see people swapping the eating disorder rules for medical or health rules in recovery? Like
Um,
anti-inflammatory plans and elimination diets and gut healing and clean eating and that sort of thing.
I I have a low tolerance for that. Yes, I hear it come up a lot. I think though anything that's an obsession, right, and not medically required, I would like us to not have to deal with, but sometimes we have to, right? I do find that like some people go towards the annoyance, right? And the anger and the grief, and some people go towards the obsession and just, try and replace one thing with the other. What I really try to do with my clients where like the eating disorder, which I think this is true for almost everyone with one, is like the special interest, right? It's all encompassing. I try
Hmm.
to replace that with recovery as the thing that's all encompassing, not necessarily the rest of it, right? I don't try and just like have it all go away. I don't think it's realistic, right? Like, I mean, you know how much of your brain space it takes up when you're sick.
Yeah.
Um, to just have nothing there, like I don't know, it's like this doesn't work for most people. I do try to make it like, okay, here are recovery books, here are recovery people to follow, here's, you know, maybe some things you want to think about in your own recovery. Like I try to replace it with these recovery oriented things. And again, that might look different for everybody. Um, until that's not needed either.
I would agree. I think I did that actually just naturally in my own recovery as well. It was like I needed to drown out the noise of the eating disorder with the noise of recovery.
Mhm.
And I needed that to be all encompassing
Right.
until I didn't.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty typical. I mean, I laugh. Like, I know a lot of people who died, and I know a ton of people who became therapists.
Mm,
And I think some of that's related, right? Eating disorders is part of what I do, but it's far from all of what I do. But I did get my start in eating disorders because it was the thing I understood best. Like, I just intuitively understood how to do that work. But as I have, gone on and grown, I think it'll always be a part of what I do, but I really do a lot more broad trauma work with neurodivergence, I do a lot of couples work, other things as well. But I think being able to have that eating disorder lens and sort of all of these intersectional lenses I get to hold, like it really helps me understand a puzzle better.
I think you can look at things from a different viewpoint, can't you? Because, I mean, let's face it, eating disorders make no logical sense to somebody that's never had one. They don't make sense.
Right.
And the level of fear is ridiculous. It's insane. Why would somebody be that afraid? But we are. It's paralyzing.
Yeah, I think some of the fear is understandable, right? We've created a society. Anybody that isn't what society deems perfect is actually traumatic, right? We're like the things that happen to you and the way you are treated and judged and the amount of power you hold is dramatically different.
Yes.
And I think we have to acknowledge that, right? That that's real. Some people have been in those bodies, some people never have, but are afraid of what they've seen. And we can't tell them that's not there. And we don't know. I think our best indicator of a body someone's going to recover into is made up of a lot of different factors, right? Like where they were before, if there was a before, maybe if they know genetic family and genetic family is relatively healthy with food, that might be useful to know.
It's hard to
You
find,
know,
though, isn't it? To find family that are relatively okay with food, that don't have even a slightly disordered relationship.
right. Very hard. Or often, like, there's that one guy, you know? Like, I mean, I certainly my family's that way.
Yeah.
Generation. I truly hope my children will be the first generation of my family without eating disorders. They might eat ice cream for every meal, but before dinner, but they will, you know. And again, I know I don't have all the control in the world over that. All I can do is what I can do, but I'm giving them the best shot possible. Proud of that. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I have clients. Part of the thing that's really hard for me about seeing teens isn't the teens. I love teens. It's their parents. And I say that and I sound terrible. Some parents are absolutely fantastic. But I also get a lot of, teens whose parents won't acknowledge their own food stuff
Yeah.
or won't acknowledge the ways maybe the family dynamic needs to shift a little bit to support health for everybody. Gosh, I have a doctor right now that I am desperately trying to explain why we don't celebrate with like pom poms every time someone gains weight who, is anorexic and is doing the work, but it's hard. It's
Oh,
like the constant explanation of the things that don't make sense is I guess what gives those of us with lived experience somewhat of a heads up. But I do think there are great clinicians that don't have lived experience, and they've managed to figure it out and to really get it. And maybe there's, someone they knew or a different reason they're deeply invested.
yeah.
But I also think it's easy to become deeply invested when so much of society is related to bodies anyway and food.
Yes. Yeah. For someone listening who feels like the body they live in makes recovery harder, what would you want them to hear right now?
Oh God, you're not alone. And that's real. Like that not everything is your eating disorder. I mean, if you're being told that, your struggles are your eating disorder and they're not, like listen to yourself about that if they're not. There's a better provider for you. And that there is a community out there. There's a community of recovered people who have everything you have somewhere. We've done it. Some of us did it not knowing, some of us did it knowing. Um, but it's possible. And your recovery doesn't have to look like everyone else's. Maybe it's just not going to. And maybe that's a gift that you get to pass on eventually.
I love that. And honestly, I don't, we're sold this idea of what recovery is supposed to look like. I think everybody's looks different.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think anybody's looks like this supposedly perfect recovery, because perfect recovery doesn't exist.
No. I mean, I don't even. Are there people who follow a meal plan perfectly and manage to find a way to control their brain enough to not have tons of thought? Like, yeah, maybe. That also seems kind of weird. Like, if you're able to control your thoughts at that level, I'm not sure that's healthy.
Well, it's still living from control, isn't it?
Right.
Control's not freedom.
Right. And aside, I do work with people leaving cults too, as well. So, like, I think there's a lot of overlap there. But you're going to have thoughts. And I tell everybody this: you don't necessarily have to want recovery because most people, when they're really sick, don't want it. It's part of the eating disorder. But if you can get to the point where you want it,
Yes.
that's enough. That's enough to do it.
Yeah. It makes sense why nobody actually really wants recovery, because it's hard, it's scary, and none of us want to face our fears.
Yeah. And it's unruly. I mean, bodies by their very nature can be unruly, right? And recovery is giving them permission to be.
Yeah.
I think that's great, but I'm also decades out.
And we live in the world we live in, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly do. And it is a locus of control sometimes when everything else feels out of control. And I think it's fair to acknowledge that the world right now for a lot of us feels very out of control. It,
Yes.
eating disorders make sense. It doesn't mean they're healthy. It doesn't mean we should keep them.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think it's worth thanking the things that served us without demonizing them. And that sort of comes from more parts work, I suppose. But we thank the eating disorder for what it's done for us. And then we find new ways to do that. We give it a new job. We use that ability to monofocus on something intensely to create something or to study something or to, I those are all gifts. Everything that can be used negatively, quote unquote, negatively, can be used positively. And our traits don't change. We just change how we use them.
I absolutely agree. Rachel, it's been amazing talking to you. I think we could go on for quite a lot longer. However,
Yeah.
we should probably draw this to a close. Where can people find you if they want to talk to you?
I always joke that if anyone wants to find me, they can, because I've had a pretty active life on the internet. But if folks are looking, my Instagram is Break the Frame Therapy.
Okay,
Um,
we'll put that in the show notes as well.
and then my website is breaktheframetherapy.com. And you can email me from either of those. And frankly, if you Google me, you will find me somehow. So
Amazing. Rachel, thank you so much for this conversation.
thank you.
I think so many people will appreciate it, especially those who felt like their bodies make recovery more complicated. If you at home are listening and you're managing chronic pain, diabetes, intolerances, autoimmune systems, or anything that makes your body feel unpredictable, I hope this helped you feel less alone. Your body having real needs does not mean that you can't do recovery or that you're failing recovery. Complex bodies deserve complex, compassionate care, and trust can still be built even if it looks different. So, thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode of Fly to Freedom. Lots of love.